Everyone, welcome. Today, I'll give you a brief introduction to Transcend software, a couple of typical use cases for it, and what we're really here for today is the non-apparent use cases for our software. A little bit of background. I formerly worked for a utility. I was a capital project manager for a while. When I first joined Transcend, I noticed that there were a lot of ways that our software was being employed for pretty typical design purposes, but not necessarily for projectized purposes. With my project background, I came up with a couple of ways that I saw the tool being useful based on prior experience, and there was a couple of ways that I felt like we could sort of get a better message out about how that projectized use of our software goes. I have a few examples today. They're pretty much geared towards a utility context, but hopefully you'll see a couple of these examples and they'll promote a little bit of your own creativity so that you could apply them to your own circumstances. So whether you come from a background as a technology provider, engineering consultant, whether you're at a utility, whether you're in an entirely different industry, we've had some folks interested from chemical companies, from life sciences doing biopharma stuff. So in that case, the examples that I'm going to go through maybe aren't one-to-one. They don't map perfectly to your exact situations, but I'm sure you guys will see that they're generic enough that you'll figure out how to apply them yourselves. So first, let me share my screen here. I've got a couple of slides. A little bit about the typical use cases. Our software is very much geared towards optioneering, comparing options side by side. You run a design quickly, you compare a couple of technologies, you compare a couple of input or output parameters. That's one of the two main use cases. The other is what I'll kind of refer to as a sensitivity analysis. So you have one situation you're looking at, you vary parameters through a range, that kind of thing, or a combination of the two. Let me show you what I mean by that. I'm actually going to go into the tool here and just going to start a new design quick. For the comparison situation, let's say I'm just comparing a couple of different technologies in here, cast MBR, and BBR, etc. For one design, I'll choose one technology. For the other, choose a different technology, and so on. For that sensitivity analysis, maybe I've decided on MBR and I'm more concerned about what the flow situation is going to look like. So some hydraulic considerations or like a min and max build out for a facility, that type of thing. So design to design, I'll run 2 MGD, 3 MGD, 4 MGD, and so on. Those are, I'll say, kind of vanilla use cases of the tool, very design oriented. But what you'll see in the software is might as well just click through to the end and get a working design. Why not? I'm just going to take recommended values though, for the sake of time. All right. What you'll see as the outputs to each of these designs are something along the lines of this packet. You get some reports, drawings, more reports, equipment lists, load lists, tables of different varieties, a lot of OpEx and CapEx related documents, instrument lists. It's a lot of documentation that as an engineer, it's very valuable from a design context, but there's also a lot of stuff in here that's helpful for many other purposes, which leads me into my first topic for the day. So first topic is an external stakeholder. A lot of those output documents, as I mentioned, a little bit geared towards usage by an engineer, asset planner. They're a little bit design oriented. That doesn't mean that there isn't a lot of information in there that's valuable from a project standpoint, because there is. One of the things I noticed with a lot of my projects in the past were the ones that tended to go over schedule for me tended to be the ones that had a lot of dependencies with external stakeholders. And external stakeholders being anyone from environmental regulators, townships for zoning, neighbors, our ratepayers, even people within the organization that I worked for, just different project teams, people higher on the food chain. But there was a lot of folks that I'll say were outside of core project group, my project team, that had a lot of impact on project schedules. And I'd never really given much thought about better ways to engage some of those stakeholders to shorten my project schedules until I joined Transcend. So I've got a couple of examples here about some of these situations where you need to engage external stakeholders for the benefit of your project. One of those is land acquisition. I've had a lot of projects over the years where a big component of the project was was either evaluating a new site, building a new site, so a greenfield, but you needed to acquire a new parcel for that facility. And in many instances, that means going through some form of township land acquisition process, land development process. Going through land development tends to not be a very quick process either, but there's a lot of instances where, as a utility, I had the benefit of being a utility. So it was for the good of our ratepayers. We were water and wastewater. Most townships that I worked with, had a good relationship with, they were willing to kind of waive the land development process as long as we had something to show them. So that something to show them often means committing the time and effort to doing a design, or at least a preliminary design, to have drawings or renderings available for you to take to the township. As it turns out, we have renderings available in our software. So these renderings, very valuable tool for something like meeting with township for land development, being able to show the plan, essentially. Standard output document. So the software gives you the ability to take something that it's a scenario you're likely already running for design purposes. You also have documents here that you can just take right out of the box and start your conversations with townships for land development. Similarly, there's other output documents in here that you could take to other external stakeholders. So another external stakeholder that I found had a lot of impact on my project schedules was the regulatory side of things, the environmental regulatory side of things. Similar circumstance. Most of my regulators had a pretty good relationship with most of them because of the volume of projects that I was doing with them. In the modern era, there's a lot of things, at least on the drinking water side, a lot of projects, a lot of technologies, a lot of new methodologies that maybe don't fall perfectly into outdated regulations. So a lot of regulators, being engineers themselves, tend to just want to see a sound engineering approach to something that maybe falls in a gray area, or they want to see a sound engineering approach if you're, say, pushing the limits on a facility. And what I mean by that is, if you are changing your facility in some meaningful way and you need to go to that regulator for permits, you might not be necessarily in a position where you're making upgrades in the form of new assets, but maybe you're just changing the way the plant operates. And those kind of things, those kind of discussions are typically done in the following order. You do ordinarily it's a complete design, by the way. So you do a design, fill out permit applications, you go to an environmental regulator and you discuss. They render a judgment one way or another on your permit. They accept or reject. If you've already committed the effort to doing a design, you've spent a lot of time and money getting to the point where you're just putting something in front of that regulator. Believe me when I say most regulators don't like that model just as much as the project managers don't like that model. If you can commit little time and little effort into putting something in front of them, wouldn't you want to do it? The answer is yes, of course. The software allows you to do that too. Just like my example with going in front of townships for land development, similar approach. You could run designs, run as many as you need, and use that to engage some of your environmental regulators early in the process. If they don't like something that you're doing with a particular design, a particular technology, you don't have to bear the risk of completing a full design before you hear their opinion on it. Any questions so far, by the way, before I continue? Sounds like no. It's perfectly fine. So I'm going to go into a hypothetical situation that sort of emphasizes what I mean by those last two examples. We're going to pretend that we have a small to medium-sized wastewater treatment plant, and it is kind of nestled in a more quiet suburban neighborhood. It's on a permanent easement owned by a township, and we're also going to pretend that plant needs an expansion. There was enough growth in the area to dictate an expansion of this existing facility. We will also say this facility does not have very much room on site. It's a tight parcel. You run a couple scenarios in our software, and you get the outputs, the documents tell you there's not enough room on site. You probably already knew that going in based on the parcel size, but we know there's not enough room here. We need to expand somehow. One way or another, you need to get the space. It's either going to come from a new location somewhere else, a new site, or an expansion of this plant, this particular plant. There's land available here, there's land available next to it, but somehow you're going to need to go through this land acquisition process. We're also going to pretend that the neighborhood surrounding this plant isn't very happy with the existing plant already. Maybe there's odor issues, maybe there's traffic issues with vehicles in and out of the plant, who knows? But it's a pretty common scenario. Wastewater plants are typically not something that everyone wants in their backyard. When you go in for this project, we're going to assume that the neighbors are not very happy that you're looking to potentially expand something they already don't like. Long story short, you know you're going to be going to a township meeting or two or more. It's in your future and you've already come to grips with it. What do you do next? You could take a somewhat traditional approach where you create a design the way you ordinarily would, manually, take it to the township meetings, present it in front of those interested neighbors and the township officials, and repeat. That could take forever. I've had it take forever. This situation is very much rooted in reality. I've had this happen to me before. You could use the Transcend design generator, create a single design, take it to the township meeting, receive their feedback, and repeat. That method, using the software, has some inherent value in that you didn't commit a lot of time or effort or money into creating that conceptual design. However, you're still, unfortunately, kind of at the mercy of the whole cycle here. So even if you don't spend very much time on that design, you still have to get on the township agendas, you still have to get in front of people and schedule things. And that in itself could still drag the project on for a while. Another way you could approach this is the software, it lets you create many designs very quickly. So you could, if you wanted to, and this is what I would recommend as well, you could run dozens of scenarios if you wanted. You'll have to decide what the appropriate number is for you, but run a lot of scenarios. That rendering that I showed earlier, being a good piece of information, a good object to display for these types of meetings. Renderings are great for these types of discussions. Show these neighbors what the plant's going to look like, essentially what they're going to see. Well, if you take one to them and you don't receive positive feedback on it, you might have to keep coming back, repeat many presentations. If you take many renderings to them, many output documents to them, you're giving yourself some flexibility to do a couple of things here. And I'll call it kind of short-circuiting this whole process of scheduling presentations to people. You come armed with many renderings, you could display all of them. You could present everything. Make a case for how all of these potential options will impact what they see, what they hear, how often traffic near the plant, odors, impact to their rates, everything. If you believe the audience is capable of understanding that whole matrix of design options, you could present them all. Or you could present one that you favor over another. You could present one that's more appealing to you and the utility, present that one to the group at the meeting, receive their feedback, and in that meeting, you can unveil another option as you receive their feedback and just essentially repeat the process in one single township meeting. Gives you some flexibility. Long stories, and you know what, before I move on, one final way you could engage some external stakeholders around this hypothetical scenario is a lot of times you might find yourself in a position where the only person in this scenario that you need approval from is the township engineer. In that case, they're going to understand a lot more of the intricacies of the project, and you could potentially take the software with you to a meeting with that stakeholder, that township engineer, and directly input values into the tool with them and make them an active participant in the design process, making it much less likely that you're going to receive some form of rejection stalling the project. This hypothetical is a little bit vague, and it was sort of township and utility oriented, but hopefully you see that this applies to many other types of situations. So this type of approach where you're creating a lot of material that you're using for flexibility in the form of your presentations, you could use it for a supervisor, presenting many options to a supervisor, showing that you've run a lot of different options and that you are highlighting ones that are appropriate to move forward with. Those kinds of discussions. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be for this township hypothetical context. I'm going to show real quick how you would create many of these design outputs to arm yourself with that sort of flexibility. I'm going to go back to our dashboard here. I have a demo project. So I'm going to modify this. I'm going to pretend that I need many renderings to take to my township meeting or to my boss or to whoever. All right. And I'm just going to pretend that I'm interested in the size of the plant. That fits pretty well with our scenario. How big is the plant going to be? How much land do I need to acquire? And how big is it going to look for my neighbors? So I'm going to run some options for, I don't know, 1 MGD next. Save that and run. I'll give it a second to think. And I probably want a handful to take with me, so I'll modify this existing project again. I'll create another project, and I'll do 3 and create another. And I will just keep repeating this for as many renderings as I want to have with me. Oops, I'll do 1 more just to be safe. I think at this point you can see how quick it is for me to create many designs. And right now I'm focused on getting renderings for this hypothetical situation where I'm trying to show people, or maybe not technical enough to understand all the other output documents. So I'm looking for renderings. The cool part about these renderings is they're all based on legitimate designs. I mean, the rendering is an output of real design calculation. So I'm getting design information for me, but I'm also getting what I need from my external stakeholders. And it's so quick to create all of those that there's honestly no reason not to. It takes a lot of risk away from schedule variances. That's a good way of putting it. So that pretty much covers some of what I wanted to go over with external stakeholders. And I think there's entire other conversations we could have about this anyway. So this was more to introduce this topic for future discussion as well. So any questions, I will take them now. Sounds like we're okay. Then we will call it a day. Thank you, everybody.